10 seconds. Good luck. You can start now.
I go?
Yes.
As chairman of EY, it's a real pleasure for me to welcome you all to this virtual panel debate on a subject that is for us companies close to our heart, as it is one of the fundamental parts of our capacity to survive and grow, and we call it taxation. Indeed, the complexity imposed on companies through a non-harmonized European tax system is leading to supplementary costs for multinationals searching tax optimization in relation to their positioning versus competitors, stock markets and investors on the one side, and on the other side leads to suspicion from third parties such as NGOs, ultimately leading to heavy structure systems from the European Union that we can now describe as CBCR, for example. This complexity has over the years convinced the majority of companies that there is in the European Union an absolute need for a simplified and more transparent tax system. And some of us have even a dream of a fully harmonized approach at European Union level. I presume it will remain a dream, but we want to be assured that each new step Europe is making in this context is leading to finally realize that goal of higher harmonization. Recently, tax has been making headlines news across the world in response to what we could label the biggest corporate tax deal in a century. The historical agreement led by the OECD, which now has all European Union countries supporting a global minimum corporate tax rate of 15% and accepting rules for multinational corporations to declare profits where they do business, is absolutely a very important point. I fully appreciate the European Commission's difficulty in relation to the complexity of the problem, but we must realize that companies are concerned. Also, because they claim not to have been part of this discussion, which probably was impossible, I accept that, but they have not been part of the discussion in relation to its practicability. The companies about 750 million euro are worried about the double taxation system. And all companies are worried about the USA having obtained somewhere specific sovereignty rights on the definition of the standards so that new competition could start between the EU and USA. I'm very pleased to have today with me two experts for our panel on that subject, and welcome, ladies first, Ms. Bridget Walsh, Ernst & Young Managing Partner, Global on Tax, and Mr. Gerassimos Thomas, Director General, Taxation and Customs of the European Commission. So let me start the panel discussion by asking Mr. Thomas the following. What does this agreement mean for the European Union's domestic agenda? Could you explain to us what is the European Union's roadmap from statement of support to implementation of what we call today the Pillar 2? And finally, I'm interested to hear from Mr. Thomas in his function, how he looks at this evolution and what it means for companies. So Mr. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to this important debate. It is important and I'm glad that you recognize that taxation is necessary not only to survive, but also to grow. I like very much your introductory statement. I think let me start with painting the overall picture against which the OECD deal was made this October. We had the COVID crisis. This affected our societies in Europe and globally and created a public health challenge which confirmed that, public action is necessary and public finances are necessary to, to frame this global public action. I think we would be nowhere if we didn't have the capacity in our health systems to respond to this crisis. And the leaders of the member states of the European Union, but also leaders all over the world, they didn't hesitate to do the necessary, to put the resources necessary in order to confront this crisis. This left us with debt. This left us with the need in the longer term to fortify our public health systems. And there has been work published by the OECD showing the vulnerabilities that we have going forward, along with other important aspects. And at the same time, the global health crisis did not come in isolation to other megatrends. We have the megatrend influencing our business, which is the climate change. It's very important. It affects the consumers. It affects the shareholders of your companies. It affects the issuing activity, as you know very well from the Green Deal perspective. So, and we have the digitalization, that it is changing the way products are produced and distributed all over the world, is affecting and restructuring the supply chains in a lot of sectors. So against this background, the OECD tax agreement that was discussed for many years, at least the last 10 or 15 years, it was being discussed quite intensively and technically. Against this background, this OECD agreement was made by 137 countries. And they didn't only see the urgency to conclude and make concessions to conclude on this agreement that obviously creates uncertainty, in the road to implementation to many, but they also concluded in a very aggressive and tight timetable. The agreement has to be finalized and come into effect by 2023. All the technical people, whether in the Commission, on the OECD, on the Ministries of Finance, all they think that this is very challenging. All they were asking for 1 or 2 more years, all the technical people. And the leaders, the global heads of state and government, the ministers of finance found that this is important that we do work hard and make this agreement a reality as soon as possible. And that is imposing a new pace in the implementation of this agreement, that it is challenging, but it is possible. And we like to engage with you in this journey. The business community is familiar with the structure of the agreement. It has been discussed for 15 years. The OECD has a structure where the business are involved. And there were public consultations earlier this year with more than 3,000 companies participating and 1,800 pages submitted. So there has been intensive consultation, but it is also true that some of the last changes and compromises that were made, they require further engagement, and we encourage very much the business community to engage with us. I had this discussion in the US. I went 2 weeks ago. I'm at the Business Roundtable, the Chamber of Commerce. The US Treasury is consulting the business. We are consulting with the businesses. The ministries are consulting with the businesses, and we will continue to consult because the success of this historic agreement depends on working together with business and not working against the business. And we believe that there is the groundwork has been done with extensive consultations in the past, and we will be very transparent on the way forward. So you mentioned, Chairman, that we have this. Companies are trying to optimize their structures, and they don't want complexity. And I think the first thing that the agreement is doing, the so-called Pillar 2, the minimum effective tax rate of 15%, is bringing transparency in the tax regimes, in the way that the effective tax regime is calculated, tax rate is calculated. And then it puts a minimum that we need in order to keep our public finances in order. And I think it is welcomed by businesses. It gives certainty going forward across a large number of jurisdictions around the world. And it allows, also businesses to avoid this endless road to tax optimization or tax competition. And I think as part also of the corporate and social responsibility, businesses after the pandemic are often the ones who rush first to help the population, to help the clients, to help the society go over. So I think this is a fair and good deal for everybody, and the minimum effective tax rate of 15% is good. And then pillar one is the modernization of the tax system. If you think about this, we have a tax system currently that has all the characteristics of the tax system of the 19th century or early 20th century. And the businesses have changed, the way clients move around, the way products are delivered. And pillar one tries to deal with this issue. It's partly the internationalization of supply chains, partly the impact of digitalization. And this is very important that we deal with this, with the reattribution of taxing rights. And I think there is one demand, and a fair demand, that the business community is making when we do the pillar one, moving forward, is to do it in the most simple way and cost-efficient way. And this is what we are working at the OECD Secretariat. We're working ourselves to do this pillar one implementation in a way that it does not create unnecessary burden. In Europe, what we plan to do, we have announced last May in the business taxation communication of the 21st century. I think we have announced to do something which is close to your dream. I don't know exactly if it's exactly your dream, but it is very close to your dream. We plan to build on this agreement, and that's why we take care that we implement it well, and then provide something that for all businesses that do cross-border business, things as really simple. So BFIT, the initiative that we have for the future corporate taxation beyond the OECD deal, is based on the pillar of the assumption and the objective that we have to simplify the corporate tax regime for the EU businesses or the businesses operating within the EU. I'm happy to elaborate further on to your further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Then I would give immediately the floor to Bridget and would like to know how she experienced in her daily contacts with clients all those issues and what advice Ernst & Young has to give to companies in scope to plan and prepare. So Bridget, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you very much to EuroIssuers for this very timely discussion on tax. And many years ago, I think that the discussion on tax would have been very much the domain of tax experts. But I think we've really seen tax become very much a boardroom issue. And it was great to hear Mr. Thomas linking it to growth and the growth agenda and looking at it very positively for the role it can play across Europe. And when we speak to our clients, I think picking up some of the themes that have been mentioned, they're in the midst of a wave of new regulations at global, EU and national level. I don't think, as Mr. Thomas put it, in the last century, we've seen such a wave of change, and we have needed it. The tax system that we have studied and grown up with really was not designed for the businesses of today. So this change is inevitable. And, the change has been triggered, to summarize, by three main factors that have been touched on in this discussion already. Firstly, the need for governments to raise the revenues to pay for the record stimulus packages in response to the pandemic. Secondly, as Chairman, as you've referred to, the historic global agreement led by the OECD with the support of the G20 and G7, the BEPS initiative. And I think thirdly, sustainability and the global movement towards a carbon future. And again, I suppose when we speak to our clients at the moment, there's three frequent issues we hear. Firstly, international tax reform and the new corporate rules and the minimum rate of 15%. And coming back again, as Mr. Thomas said, to the basic tenets of taxation, companies want certainty over what tax they're going to pay on the profits in the future so they can plan and determine where to invest. And fundamentally, they do not want to suffer double tax. So the complexity of some of the calculations needed for the new rules is something that we've been working very closely with clients around, both to explain what the rules mean and to model them. I would say that's probably the real topic of the day at the moment. Secondly, tax, as we can see, is playing a key role in the sustainability agenda. COP26 accelerated this point of view, with 2022 declared a year of business action. And again, we're working actively with our clients around the incentives that are being used around the green agenda from a tax perspective, but also the new taxes that are being introduced to drive change of behaviours in this area. And then finally, Mr. Chairman, our clients are really looking at the power of technology in transforming their tax functions to really set them up for this future of tax. And as was referred to, there is a lot of complexity and a lot of change at a time when there's a war for talented individuals in the tax profession. And I would say increasingly our clients are trying to deal with this through the use of better technology. As we know, there's a lot of data underpinning our tax system. And again, using technology to use that data in a much more efficient manner, both in the companies and how they interact with the tax authorities, again, is an increasing trend. So given that backdrop, I'm very much looking forward to the rest of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget. I think, first of all, thanks to both of you, I think to Mr. Thomas to make a clear picture of what he presently is acting and doing in respect to that new way of looking at the tax world. And thanks to Bridget for giving the first impressions of the companies. I have a question in the following sense, in relation to the reality of today. We have already touched that point, but governments across Europe are facing today a unique set of issues and have to respond to economic implications of the pandemic with record stimulus packages. So we all are very glad that that is happening, but they are also now confronted with raising inflation, which was something that could be expected, but a little bit overseen. We have an increase in COVID infections, so the story is not finished. We have continuing supply chain disruption and climate change issues, and weighing all of this up in monetary and fiscal policies to revenue raise. So all of the governments are confronted with that new reality. Mr. Thomas, do you see in this particular moment where member states are all confronted with that increased need for budgets, a real possibility to move forward in relation to further tax simplification? Let's not call it harmonization. You speak to member states on a daily basis. And what are their priorities today? So my question is, should we not make ourselves too much illusions that what you are trying to do today will really be instrumental tomorrow, or is it something that we will have to wait for a couple of years more? How is your vision on that one?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I think in the overall picture of the COVID, supply chain disruptions, energy high prices, I think the European Commission, the European Union, the governments have responded with rapid action. And we see a substantial amount of money that was decided to be spent in order to help government spending went hand in hand to accompany this transition and this emergency. It is very important. A lot of this government spending went to issues from which the companies will benefit, particularly in the area of the Green Deal and digital taxation. But also taxation has been used very actively. I mean, just on Monday, we decided a new VAT rate regime, that it is the finance minister decided a new VAT rate regime, that it's much simpler of a patchwork of exceptions to VAT rates that you have around Europe. This was a debate for many years. Every country had another exemption on the VAT rates, and we managed under the Slovenian presidency to reach an agreement with clear priorities, reduction on VAT rates primarily for environmental support, and elimination of the different exceptions that were taking place here and there for historical reasons. So we did have this week a good example where ministers, despite the potentially political cost of changing things internally, decided to a more simplified and coherent regime that the overall global challenges play a role in this simplification. I think BEFIT, our future proposal for corporate taxation in Europe, is based on this premise that simplification will reduce compliance cost, and therefore the revenue that it's get for corporate taxation is put at good use. Because businesses that are doing business in different member states they do have small businesses much more, but also big businesses have a big compliance cost. And this is against the objective of the single market, against the objective of looking at our strategic autonomy with more integrated supply chains. And I think the ministers understand this. It will take time and a lot of effort from us to look at the nitty-gritty, as Bridget said, to make sure that we anticipate all the technical issues coming from this simplification. We need the help of the businesses. We need the help of the professions, so consultant and accounting professions, to get it right. But I think simplification, it's a way to get eventually more revenue. And in that thesis of using simplification of business taxation as a way to get more revenue and as a way to avoid unnecessary and useless tax competition, it is something that everybody understands, and it's becoming at the top of the political agenda. And we have seen a lot of European countries that are converging on this, even countries that traditionally were more reluctant on having a common discussion on taxation. It is remarkable that all European member states participated in this decision on the OECD tax deal. And we have worked very hard with all of them, even the ones that were more reluctant, to make sure that recognize the long-term benefits of this decision. So yes, I think simplification is part of the agenda. I would also echo what Bridget said, that taxation will play an important role in the climate transition. We are, with the Energy Taxation Directive, with the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, with new green taxation initiatives, taxation will be an enabler for greener policies. So we do have an increasing, let's say, role for what we call behavioral taxes in the tax system, to help the companies transition to new energy sources, to more sustainability. This will be important. And I invite all of you to engage us in this debate about the future tax mix that we will need over the next 20 years. This goes beyond the corporate taxation that is now on the table, but we have announced a tax symposium in the second half of next year, where we want to discuss with the member states, the regions, everybody, the overall tax mix, the labor taxes, the issue of the labor taxes, consumption taxes, behavioral taxes, the overall tax mix beyond corporate taxation. This is not the only issue affecting businesses, and we need your input.
Okay. I must admit I am impressed by your enthusiasm and your messages about the fact that governments are really inclined today now and realize that they have to go in a more global way and an approach than in the individual, which is quite what they did always in the past, by the way. So my question to Bridget is, how do the companies see that? Because I know companies are very critical on that aspect, because they live in their countries. They know how political people are acting, and sometimes have to act to, let's say it, to be re-elected one way or another by the people they represent. But I would be interested to hear from Bridget, what is now the way and the business is looking at those possibilities of governments and central banks that have those macroeconomical tools in terms of local tax and global taxes to manage their economies. What are we seeing in terms of tax races already, or do we not see anything? And in Europe, and do you think that trend that we are having today is going to continue?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and well done, Mr. Thomas. It's always quite nice at an event like this to be able to announce something hot off the press. So I think most of our clients and those on the call today would welcome the VAT changes and the simplification. So it's quite nice to have that hot off the press. So, Mr. Chairman, firstly, answering the first part of your question, our clients at the moment, as you will anticipate, are dealing with a whole lot of factors, and Mr. Thomas touched on some of them. Massive supply chain changes, whole lot of macroeconomic factors, etc., and real concerns around inflation and their impacts. And of course, we're very aware that one of the key tools governments have in their armory is fiscal policy. And of course, if you wanted to dampen inflation, for example, quite quickly you could make some changes in taxation, and we've seen some examples of that. But again, coming back to what businesses want, it really is more clarity, stability, and predictability of the tax system so they can plan and make long-term investments. I've grown up in a transaction environment, and when a company's buying another company and doing the modeling, tax can be a significant factor in that. But again, just being able to model that with some predictability and stability is really important. And if I look at our recent EY EU attractiveness study, we surveyed 550 international decision makers, and we found Europe, thankfully, is still a very attractive location for FDI, foreign direct investment. And three key reasons are cited. Number one, the very stable political environment and regulatory regime, the robust and reliable infrastructure, and our strong, skilled workforce availability. And of course, point number one, taxation is very much part of the stability of the tax system and the regulatory regime. So again, business, as we know, capital is very mobile in this global world. I see it as I speak to clients around the world. So I think Mr. Thomas's point around stability, around clarity, around as long a term certainty as we can offer is really important. And then, Mr. Chairman, coming to the second part of your question, in addition to the normal budgetary cycle, our clients are concerned about increased tax rates and also increased controversy between countries as they, are dealing with their fiscal deficits. And of course, of the new taxes that we have seen raised, they tend to have two functions. Number one, to raise revenues, and we've talked about the reasons for that. But secondly, an increasing trend is to drive behavioural change, such as the green taxes that we've seen. So we've seen new taxes being introduced, such as plastic taxes in Spain and Italy, the EU's carbon adjustment mechanism, and here in the UK, a new health and social care levy to pay for the health service. So overall, we do expect this trend to continue through a mix of both new taxes and increased taxes, as we see governments responding to fiscal deficits and the climate change challenge. But I think Mr. Thomas made a really interesting point. We will see the tax mix changing as well. And when you look at a location, it's not just the headline corporate tax, it's, as Mr. Thomas mentioned, labour taxes and all the other tax burden as well, being taken into account increasingly by corporates as they're investing and they become more sophisticated in looking at the holistic picture.
Yeah, I think it's very important to hear and also to realize that we should not, if we go for a simplified system, which we all dream about, I think at least I dream about, and many other ones, we should not have tax tomorrow as an excuse for companies to run away from Europe. So we have to we have to be very careful in how that is done, but it's not my job, it's your job by definition, Mr. Thomas, and I'm totally sure that you're excellent in that function. But we have to be very careful that companies are already looking at the labor cost as being one of the elements to go to one or another country. In the past, it was a very strong movement from Western to Eastern to Central Europe. We know that, but tax is also an element, and tax should not be in the new way of doing for tomorrow, in my opinion, a new argument to move out or disappear and create and destroy jobs in the European Union. So, but in this respect, we have now also seen that through the whole pandemic that there has been a major issue on global trade, and therefore people had all over the world to deal with supply chain disruption, and are reviewing their business models to make them more fit for the future. I'm sure that many companies today are questioning themselves on things that were quite normal, considered as being the normal way of behavior, and that today suddenly things are looked with another angle because of that negative element of the globalization that they have discovered through the pandemic. So I would like to have from Bridget kind of a response in your conversations with CEOs. Are those factors weighing up for them to make their supply, or how do they want to make their supply chains more resilient and less prone to risk? And is tax a part of the design of their future operating models, in your opinion?
Thank you, Chairman. I would say that this is a very topical issue for us with our clients. And, changing a supply chain is not a very easy task for a large organization. It tends to be all-encompassing and integrated into an organization. And most of our clients trade globally. So, global trade challenges are fast becoming a major issue for them. So, as you anticipated, some of the drive to change supply chain is on the back of the pandemic and the reality that just in time probably isn't quite the appropriate model, particularly in some sectors. So having some more control over local production, whether it's pharmaceuticals or the like. Another key driver is just concerns about global trade and geopolitics. Again, that's making in certain industries, as you can imagine, semiconductors and others, where organizations are just keen to have some more local control and more nationalistic control. Also, as you can anticipate, on the back of the digital revolution, we're seeing a huge shift in supply chains. If I think of some of our retail clients who've now moved to direct sales to consumers, in some cases, they don't need a local presence in some of the jurisdictions. And then I think the other driver we're seeing is sustainability. I think that is more a future driver that we're just starting to see. I think the first wave was really around some of the power generation in corporates, but now we're seeing companies start to, again, really think about what transformation they need in their supply chain for a whole lot of reasons. Have they got the right suppliers from an ESG perspective? Where are they going to locate certain parts of production, particularly as we see carbon border adjustments, et cetera, coming in? So I would say we're at the start of something really fundamental here. It's probably the main issue that companies on a global scale are speaking to us about. They're really starting to model out the impact of these changes. And I would say also the more sophisticated companies are really looking at that at the same time as the fundamental shift we've seen in tax policy that we've just talked about. And really, again, these changes won't be driven by tax, but tax is obviously a key component to that as they decide where to locate their supply chain and how to comply with the new rules that we're seeing. So we're seeing a real convergence of both tax and commercial reasons for groups to reevaluate their supply chain structures. And overall, they're looking for a more agile business model to deal with the world ahead.
Oh, thank you. Maybe that's a good moment to jump to the new digital disruption and technological advantages that are taking place all over the business world at an incredible speed and scope. What about tax technology? Is there something that could have a profound impact on the way we live our lives and companies do business in relation to that aspect? Is the technology helping to digitalize the tax, or is it something that will remain like in the past? What are the benefits, in your opinion? Bridget, if I may ask you.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were speaking to Mr. Thomas. Apologies.
No, I was talking to you. Sorry, I think tax technology is something probably more in your scope, so I thought you would have an opinion on that one.
Yes, certainly, Mr. Chairman.
If Mr. Thomas wants to intervene, no problem at all.
I also have an opinion on tax technology, but after Bridget.
Yeah, I was going to say, Mr. Thomas and I have had some good discussions on this topic and are very aligned on its importance. But yes, as governments are increasing their automation, the enhancement of data functions and the importance of data flow within tax and finance functions has really increased. And again, it's a really topical issue for us with clients. When we speak with tax directors, and some of our recent surveys have shown, it's probably the top issue on the tax director's agenda at the moment. As you'll be aware, there's enormous amounts of data in the tax function. And historically, we've often had very manual operations, pulling data from multiple sources for the filing of taxes. But we found that technology is really revolutionizing this. And when you come back to the complexity we talked about at a time where there's scarce talent, this is where we are really seeing organizations investing in either their own technology or outsourcing some of the compliance to firms like us to run for them. And if I look at our own firm, we've invested a lot in designing an end-to-end tax platform globally that can ingest data from ERP systems, complete the tax computations around the world, and give the tax director one port of call to see where the compliance is at and to file that compliance. Particularly in the indirect area of tax, again, we've seen a real drive to automate, again, ingest the information, file the indirect tax returns with the authorities, and really automate a lot of that compliance. So technology is playing a really valuable role, I would say, in the tax function. And it's been very impressive how tax authorities have already embraced this, and in some cases have probably stepped a few steps ahead of what we might have expected. But Mr. Thomas, it would be good for you to share your views as well. Extremely topical point for us.
Yeah, thank you. No, it is extremely important part of our preparation for the future tax policy. As we bring more and more coordination, I think technology and data strategies offer the solution to a lot of these additional challenges. So we do plan, and we have announced that later next year, we will have an initiative on the VAT in the digital age. We will try to simplify the whole system around VAT and bring it to the digital age with real-time changes. And therefore, this will facilitate a lot the work of businesses. It will reduce compliance costs, and it will save money and increase revenue. We are looking at technologies, with on the withholding tax exceptions. This is a big issue, and both at international level and European level, we are looking at this. It is very important for investors. Some, as you are issuers, you have you are invited. You invited us here as European issuers, so it's very important for your investors. And this is an area where data, but even technologies like blockchain, we are looking to help us, to facilitate and reduce the transaction cost. Around taxation, a lot relies now in the global tax system, a lot relies on the exchange of information. And the exchange of information that happens across jurisdictions, between tax authorities or between your bank and your tax authority, all these exchanges of information cross-border, they have been legally established, but they will work much more efficiently once we bring technology into this, and this they will reduce compliance costs. I think there is one issue that we have to be mindful in Europe, and I think it is a good thing that we have in Europe, is that we have strict data protection rules. I think this data protection is an aspect that it needs to be built in our technology developments, but it is certainly something that we do have on the top of our policy agenda, both for the tax and for the customs issues, which is also important for the supply chains that we just discussed. So technology will offer the solutions. Now, what we need to do with the technology, there is also one pitfall. We need to carefully to see how we use technology strategically going forward. You can invest a lot in IT, and if there is not strategic approach, then it can be stranded investment very quickly. So I think what we are striving to do together with the tax authorities is to make the approach that it is sustainable in the medium term and make a quantum leap, by using the data flows rather than just having digitalizing, let's say, paper processes. This is the pitfall. The banking sector did it in the early years of fintech. They just digitalized some paper, let's say, processes, and then they had to reopen it and go back. So we need to work together with the technology providers and the tax authorities and the businesses so that we do this investment, we reap the benefits, and we go directly to the 21st century.
Okay, thank you. Then, if you allow me, I would like to go to the hottest topic of today for us as companies. I know taxation is a hot topic, but the real hot topic today is the climate change problem and the ESG. And on sustainability, there are a hell of a lot of worries in the heads of the companies. Bigger companies cope with it a little bit easier, but many small companies, even small quoted companies, have a lot of difficulties. And in that respect, the sustainability is asking for a lot of money, in the sense that small companies have to be helped to think about how to tackle the problem or to be aware about the problem. Second, once aware about the problem, they have to be helped in the technological innovational aspects. And we are pleading on both aspects that Europe is really helping companies by subsidizing one way or another those actions for the future. So all of this costs money. And then at the end of the day, it's clear that governments will have to make choices to help some companies that are in the base businesses, what we call in taxonomy, the less good ones, to make them survive. Otherwise, they could lose a hell of a lot of jobs in their countries, and that is something they certainly would not like. So in that respect, I have a worry, and the worry is that who will handle that global aspect of money that is to be spent in the next 10 years to come, and who will? The risk is very high that is a money stream that will be fulfilled through tax raising, and if that tax raising is on the local level, then I have my question to you. Should it not be a global aspect, and how will that be taken into account when one talks like you? I know it's a little bit more a political question, but you are confronted with it. So what is the ideal solution in that respect? I'm thinking that United Nations COP26 climate summit has recently concluded even themselves that tax will play a crucial role in driving sustainable behavior and change. That's then the other side of the picture. But do you agree? And who should have, in your eyes, what is the best approach for solving that problem?
Mr. Well, Thomas. If I may, I think that jumping from a situation now that we are now directly to the international solution for everything is very challenging. So I think international cooperation, it is necessary for a lot of things. We have now this international cooperation on this corporate taxation is very important. And there are many of these, the transition period from here to a decarbonized economy by mid-century, that it is the ambition of everybody, relies in a different mix of policy instruments in its country or in its continent. In Europe, we have market measures like the ETS, we have a lot of regulation, and then we have carbon pricing. That are the three areas, and carbon taxation. There are three areas driving the tools that we are using to get to a decarbonized society. The mix of these tools, it is different in each continent, but therefore we strive for coordination rather than exact harmonization on everything. But harmonization is very active at the G20 level, at the G7 level first, and then at G20 and more globally. I think that, the spending, first of all, you started with the spending. In the short term, let's be clear, taxes have not gone up. So, so far, the government is helping. There will be 2 trillion spent in Europe only from EU money, EU sources, in addition to the national budgets. 2 trillion will be spent from 2020 to 2027. 550 billion will be spent on Green Deal action. So the transition will be helped by governments in Europe. The benefit will be to the companies and to the clients. Second, the spending of the money has very strict KPIs. So compared to other continents, we have a very advanced system of controlling expenditure and making good that the money will be for good use. And third, there is a discussion about own resources. So at least for the bonds that we are issuing at the European level, we will define specific own resources by which we will let's say repay this debt. And it has been announced in July that a small part of the carbon border adjustment mechanism and a small part of the ETS will find their way into these own resources, and there will be more proposals to come. On the 22nd of December, this issue, there will be more proposals. So we do have a plan, and we will be very transparent about this. And I think you're worried that suddenly everybody will raise taxes for nothing. I think, at least for Europe, is not justified. In other countries, in the UK, in the US, in other countries, they have already raised corporate taxes, but we have not. So I think that we are acting on this very responsibly. I think that taxonomy, Europe takes the lead. It gives certainty to businesses, and we are transparent in how this is done. So both in the issues of green transition, the taxonomy, or the energy taxation, or the plastic taxation, in all these issues, Europe takes the lead. But the result that we have seen so far is that businesses welcome this rather than living in a way of uncertainty. And I think the countries that are late in having a clear transition path and detailed transition path for the net zero, they will be suffering rather than gaining from this. So we are glad that the first delegated act on taxonomy was adopted this week, and it has been announced that the next one that everybody is waiting for on the treatment of gas, etc., will be announced soon. So this will give transparency and predictability to Europe. And this is the same like the taxes. I know it is very challenging, but for the Pillar 2, once this deal was done, 22nd of December, we will put a directive on the table very quickly. It will allow you to comment on this, to participate in the discussion on the Council and the Parliament. It will allow you to participate on this, and it will give predictability and legal certainty. Without the directive, there would not be legal certainty. At least for all European countries, this will be implemented in the same way. And as Bridget said, taxation stability and predictability in more and more company CEOs that I speak to, it's for them even sometimes more important than the actual level of tax rate. The fact that they have stability and some simplification. These are the three things that are changing also from the point of view of the companies. So last, there are winners and losers from this transition, like everything. In the businesses, if everything were stable, it will be in a communist regime and there will be no businesses. So there will be, let's say, winners and losers, and the ones that are more agile and take a longer-term view, they will win. We cannot satisfy everybody when the society is changing, and certainly we cannot satisfy the businesses that do not want to change. And they happen from time to time. There are some businesses, and I think you, through your associations, where the businesses come together, you have a role to encourage your businesses to adapt to change and the needs of the society.
Thank you. Your words on how Europe is looking at this subject is really assuring in terms of how the problem will be handled, and that's for us a very important message, I think. In relation to what companies think, I hear what you say, and indeed some companies are having a particular view on how they want to act in this circumstances. And of course, we also have to realize that sometimes there are attacks from outside the companies that are not always based on real, that are more based on emotions than based on real thinking processes that are profound and in depth. But anyway, it would be good to hear maybe Bridget in the last question, and then we give the floor to the audience if they have any questions. What are you seeing, Bridget, when you speak to businesses across Europe about the climate change? And what is your advice to give to those organizations when they, in terms of embarking on that sustainability journey? And by the way, Mr. Thomas, I assure you, we will pick up the challenge you give to us in terms of responding to your questions and the demands that you launch to us to help you in building up the way you see it, and that is then for us probably also the way we see it as more practical, realizable. But my question is to Bridget, what does the business says to you in terms of those aspects on climate change, and what do you have as advice?
Yeah, thank you. And as you may well anticipate, this is a hugely topical area for our clients. And just to quote one of our recent studies, our recent CEO imperative study found that 80% of CEOs believe it's likely companies will take significant new steps to take responsibility for the social and environmental aspects of their operations over the next 5 years. And for some of our clients, it's driven by shareholders, pension funds asking the question. For some of them, it's driven by their customers. For others, it's their employees who are demanding a better sense of responsibility and purpose. And if you look at us in EY, around building a better working world and having a clear purpose on our carbon limits for our employees. And for others, I suppose also the risks to their business and the cost if they don't comply with the new legislation that's going to come in. And as you rightly said, and Mr. Thomas said, tax is very much at the heart of sustainability. And it does play a fundamental role in driving behavioural change. And as I mentioned earlier, we are seeing governments increasingly use tax to achieve some of this behavioural change. Our green tax tracker shows that there were over 4,300 environmental taxes, and on the other side, 3,600 incentives in the jurisdictions covered. So I think, as Mr. Thomas said, it's not all about raising taxes. I think there is a little bit of carrot and stick, dare I say it, but huge implications for businesses, and our clients are very actively working with us, looking at their supply chain from one end to another to see, where, firstly, to assess it, to see what their current status is, whether it's the quality of their suppliers or where they're producing, and to, at the other end, what the redesign for the new world needs to look at. So very active engagement with clients. Probably one of our most topical issues at the moment is all around the sustainability agenda. We're just seeing a seismic shift as we've moved into this era, and a very exciting area for, I think, businesses and governments at the moment.
Yeah.
If I may make a comment, Mr. Chairman, the same way that you are looking of simplification of the taxation system, I am afraid for some, we will also be looking at simplification of the tax incentives, because sometimes people do not complain when there are complicated incentives, but they complain on the taxes. So the two things go at the same side. And that is, for example, a major component of our energy taxation directive. The first thing we want to do is not to raise at all the tax, but to ensure that there is a simplification and let's say elimination of the different hidden incentives. And this also already will make, let's say, the system becoming more simplified.
Yeah, I agree with you. And this is not the subject of this panel discussion on taxation, but I'm pleading for really realizing that most of the companies are still not aware about their real ESG problem. They do not know how to measure where they end up in the whole system of taxonomy or what they have to do. So I'm pleading for transition and education. That's for me, in the present moment, the most important element, not for the very big ones, but for the smaller companies. And that is a concern I have as an European Issuers chairman, for also the majority of the companies on the stock exchange are not that big and need some help in that respect. And that means transition time and educational support in the process, but it's another subject. Anyway, I am looking if there are any questions from our people that are listening to us today and assisting to the panel. I don't see anyone for the moment. We are running almost in time, so maybe the best is that I conclude over here our session. Would like to thank both our experts to their very interesting and positive contribution, to this important subject. Would like to finish by restating that what I said about the request for harmonization at EU level, member companies have always supported harmonization of corporate tax rules, base and rate, on the condition that they take into account the attractiveness of the EU territory and the competitiveness of European companies, and that is sometimes, I realize, kind of a contradiction that is not easy to solve. But member companies consider, therefore, that the work ongoing goes in the direction of standardization and are therefore absolutely not opposed to the project. On the contrary, they consider that the work on Pillar 2, since it provides not only common tax rules, base and rate, but also a mechanism for distributing the tax between the states, should be the common European rule. And the forthcoming European work, Business in Europe framework income taxation BEFIT, really is something that we expect to go in this direction. And I thank you for your contribution, for all of you. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation.
Yes, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And we're clear. Thank you very much. You may disconnect now.
Have you
Thank
behaved the way you should behave?
Was that okay, Luke? Was that okay for you?
For me, it was okay. Was it okay for you?
Yeah, very happy. Couldn't have gone better. Thank you very much. I hope your members found it useful.
We will see what they say.
Okay. Thanks. It's been nice being with you today. I hope you have a good, happy Christmas. Thank you, Mr. Operator, for all your help.
All the best.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Very good. Very
Bye-bye.
good. Perfectly streaming. Thank you.
Thank you.